the way
Special governing board meetings.
that would be it.
Okay. And then agenda is the attachment.
Yeah, you have the print. You already have the,
Okay.
and they're going to be putting it on the screen too. So,
Okay.
but you have it on your iPad. You can follow along. So
Well, you know, I've spoken out at
options.
so many board meetings, I could be in for a very bad dose of karma here in the next 4 years.
Hey. Hi. Do we know them? Oh.
Better turn mine off too.
Okay, we all ready?
You're welcome to.
Kim,
Or
Kim's here.
don't. Is Ron coming?
What's that? Ron's not going to be here. He can't make it to the meeting. All rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Call to order. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call. Mr. Bear is missing, and we have two new board members with us, Jenny Frank and Darcy Tweedy. So with that, can I have a motion to adopt the agenda? Do I have a second? Anyone?
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those against? 3-1. Okay, first item on the agenda is the staffing formula. Who wants to take the ball here?
That would be me. I was asked to do this. All right.
No.
Right, exactly. All right, good evening, President Gregoire, governing board members, our new members to be in January, and Dr. Weitenheimer. Tonight I'm going to be going over the certified staffing allocation process, and part of this will also include some of the classified staffing processes as they are parallel with one another. I need a clicker, thank you. Okay, so this is the agenda that we're going to follow. The intent for today is to share with you the guidelines that we use to prepare and to maintain annual staffing every single staffing cycle. We will begin with what we do to prepare for staffing. That will include a review of staffing sheets and how we prepare for staffing sheets. We'll look at class loads and contacts. Both of those items come out of our certified manual. Open enrollment influence on staffing will be the next item that we'll move into. We'll then look at after budget staffing, which we call post Gold Book staffing. We'll look at procedures for maintaining staffing in both the summertime and throughout the following year, and the use of the contingency staffing that you approve for us each year, and then I will recap at the end. Okay, so preparing for staffing, and this is the phase that we are actually in right now for the 17-18 school year. These are the things that we do annually. So starting in November, and we're working through this right now in December, we take a look at roll up from grade to grade and from the feeders. So for example, we would look at our first grade numbers at Anthem School, and we would roll those numbers directly into second grade. We also take a look at feeder schools. So the eighth graders that are graduating out of Anthem are going to be rolled over to Boulder Creek High School, and so that enrollment is sent that direction at this time. Of course, adjustments are made as we move throughout the year because that enrollment can change, and students can choose to open enroll at different locations. So that leads me into the open enrollment application process. Currently, we are in the priority consideration phase of the 17-18 school year, so we are advertising and encouraging all of our parents to fill out their open enrollment applications. The advantage of this right now is that I can take a look at all of those applications and get a good idea of how we're going to need to staff with potential additional students at that location. We also look at strategic planning. there are lots of things that can occur with strategic planning. So for example, in the Renaissance program, there might be a decision that they want to reduce the FTE at a location and add the FTE at a different Renaissance location based on staffing or based on programming. They may decide that they want to add a STEM component like they did at Canyon Springs. And so I need to know that because we're going to adjust the staffing a little bit that direction based on that program need. And also any roll-up that might occur in a program can impact staffing. And if you recall, we discussed that quite a bit last year with the Mandarin program. Mandarin students moving up to the next grade, we have to be very attentive to that because we're going to need to know that we'll add that additional staffing coming up into the next year. One of the most important parts that we look at in this phase, and this phase does go into January and will continue out through the entire spring, is input from administration and departments. I do hold a staffing meeting with every single administrator, every single building level administrator. I share with them what we are anticipating their enrollment to be and what we anticipate we will be allocating their direction. They share with me any of their agreements or their disagreements or their concerns, or sometimes they share things that we aren't aware of, such as a new development that's in their area and we haven't caught that yet, or they have noticed a trend that there are a lot of students that seem to enroll in first grade. That tended to happen a lot when we didn't have full day kindergarten. They saw a lot of students come in the first grade. So there's conversation back and forth. We consider that, and then we may add staffing after we have allocated the original staffing sheet. Then we move into long-range planning. These are things that we look at for the future. So an example would be a demographer report. Jim and Heather work with a demographer to take a look at developments that are being built in our area. They look at trends where people are moving, families are going, and they provide that information. And of course, it is all predictive, and it is not always accurate, doesn't always come to fruition, their predictions. We do look at enrollment trends, and then, of course, we have long-range strategic planning. For example, if the Building Capacity Usage Committee decided to redesign boundaries or redesign a school or repurpose a school, we would have to start staffing that school differently. So moving down the road, if you, oh, that wouldn't be you. If you flip, I'll flip this one. I'm multitasking. Here's an example of a staffing sheet. So this is Anthem. Anthem is a K-8 school. You'll see in the top left-hand corner there are 726 kids that are projected for the campus. And then kindergarten is staffed based on what it was the following year. So 67 students is what you'll see. 67 is first grade, so they mirror that. We're predicting that approximately the same number of kindergarten students will come in that were there the year before. The rest of them you'll see as roll-up, and then you'll see that we allocate the teachers, and all of those allocations, which I will be going over, determine the numbers that you see on the right-hand side. And you'll see the difference, too, from the 15-16 school year to the 16-17 school year. The next slide, you're going to see Constitution. I wanted to show you a campus like Constitution because their staffing sheet looks a little bit different. We have to consider two different things here at Constitution. One of them is the Gen Ed enrollment. That's the first line you see there, the 70, 78, 64, 87. And then you'll see a line called ELD enrollment. The staffing standard for ELD is different. The requirements for ELD and instruction are different. So we keep those separated because we know if you look at kindergarten, there's going to be 70 kids on the Gen Ed side, so they're going to be allocated 3 teachers. However, there are 28 ELD students, so I work with Trevor, and this year I'll be working with Patty Wan as well at ELD staffing, and we do have standards for that. And the line item that you can look for on the staffing sheet is in the central section. You'll see art, band, and then ELD. And this last year, 7 total teachers were allocated to Constitution to manage the load of ELD enrollment. Middle school is allocated a little bit differently because they're not necessarily bound by the master scheduling constraints that a K-6 or a K-8 are bound by. So we allocate to them instead a total FTE, and then they get to determine their schedule based on their enrollment, 7th grade versus 8th grade, based on what the students want to take and based on the certified teachers that they have. So here you see Deer Valley Middle School last year was allocated 22.2 FTE, and that was with a divisor of 28 that we use at the middle school. And I should mention, I'm going to flip back here really quickly to Constitution. If you were to do the math, you would see that it doesn't directly line. If you take the 70 and divide by 3, we might be over a little bit. And a few years ago, I believe it was maybe 4 years ago, the district with budget constraints decided at this point to go into use a formula that we call tighter staffing tighter. And so at this point, we staff tighter, and then we watch the enrollment, and through those open enrollment applications and the discussions with the administrator, we will kick it over if it looks close. But the reason we continue with it is it has saved the district financially by staffing a little bit tighter. And then moving to high school, the divisor here is 27.5, and you're going to see that this staffing sheet looks very similar to the middle school staffing sheet. Okay. Class loads, this is out of section 15 of the certified manual. These are all of the caps that we monitored and that you approve, actually, that we will not go over these numbers. And if we do go over these numbers, we have to put processes in place to address this. So in kindergarten, the cap right now is 26, first grade 27, second and third grade, we monitor those at 28, fourth grade is 32, and fifth and sixth are both at 33. The grade levels that have the asterisks next to them indicate a different load for ELD programming, and you'll see those down below. Contacts are different than loads. So when you move into grade 7 all the way up through grade 12, they no longer have a classroom load. They now have total contact amount that they're allowed to have. So it's 7th and 8th grade. They're allowed to have a total of 170 contacts within a day. If they exceed that 170, then that's when we would begin to monitor and allocate additional staffing. Grades 9 through 12 are also allowed 170 contacts, and PE at grades 7 through 12 are allowed 185 contacts. Special areas in grades K through 6 are really monitored more on a class cap, try not to exceed this amount, rather than contact or by load, and that is largely due to the fact that they're a very dynamic position. For example, a music teacher has sections K all the way up through 6, and then they could have choir in 7 and 8, and they agree to have the biggest choir that they possibly could have. So their contacts would go very high. So instead, we staff them based on sections at a campus, and those sections help the master schedule with prep time. Those of you that have been teachers understand that big desire for that prep time. That's what they're providing on that campus as well. And then moving to the next slide, special education student loads. I want to point to the asterisks on the bottom. When we're looking at a student load, we are specific in the certified manual that this is an IEP. It is not the amount of students that a special education teacher may be interacting with in the day, may be planning for in the day, may be teaching in the day. This is how many IEPs they are allowed to manage within a year. So at the K-6 and the K-8 campus, they are not to exceed 15 IEPs. Middle school, 20 IEPs, and at the high school, 20 IEPs. A few years ago, you can ask questions.
Let's go through it, then we'll come back.
Okay. A few years ago, we moved into something called reorganization, if you remember that term, in special education. And a committee made a recommendation to move into something called a base model at campuses. So we now staff campuses based on this base. So at K6s, the base is a five special education teachers, K8, 7 special education teachers, middle school, 5 special education teachers, and high schools have 10. If I were to show you the staffing sheets for every single campus, though, you would not see those exact numbers because the student support services and human resources have reviewed annually the need for base and budget constraints. So nearly all are at base, but some are not. And that is because we saw how many special education students they had on their campus, and we believed we could hold for another year and review again. Or the principal gave the staffing back because they were not utilizing the staffing, and they would review that later. The other thing that you might see on a staffing sheet is that they have over base. And that would be because they have so many students that they actually qualify based on this IEP model for more special education staffing beyond base.
Could you say those base numbers again?
K6, the base is 5. 7 for K8. 5 for middle school. 10 for high school.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. You also have a copy of Section 15. I won't go through every single staffing standard because there are so many, but there are staffing standards for other areas in student support services, for counselors, and other positions in our district. Open enrollment influence on staffing. If you recall, a couple of years ago, the board gave the direction to keep open enrollment open throughout the year and to be liberal in reviewing open enrollment applications. So we moved open enrollment to human resources, and though it is, it's work. Open enrollment application review is a lot of work. We appreciate having it in our department because we have been able to be far more timely with staffing because we have real-time numbers and we can actually review those numbers as we staff. So with the board's direction, we do give priority consideration to all applications. As I shared with you earlier, December 11th is our cutoff date this cycle for the 17-18 school year to help us with staffing. And we do review those applications continually throughout the staffing cycle. And then we do monitor applications in the summer a little bit differently because the Gold Book locks down after you approve the budget. And so we only have so much contingency staffing that we can utilize. So in the summertime when we are reviewing open enrollment applications, we do look to see that open enrollment applications might be coming from the outside. Any student coming from the outside has potential funding for around $5,000. And so we know that that is going to assist us with paying for a teacher in the summertime, at any time, but after we start using our contingency staffing. Okay. All right, so those processes continue throughout the spring, and then in the summertime I mentioned that the Gold Book locks down, and then at that point we move into different phases of staffing, and we wait for the first day of school to begin, and we monitor enrollment. So if you look at this cycle, every single week we are reviewing enrollment, and an enrollment report is developed and sent to us for review. And that's the same enrollment report that Mr. Migliorino reviews each month with you at the governing board meetings. We look at every single grade level. Each campus is required to submit their enrollment every single day for the first 10 days, and we review that for surplus, and we also review that for overages. Every single week, we communicate any overage or any surplus to Cabinet. Cabinet, we make a recommendation based on the formula. Cabinet approves the formula, and they also approve any allocation of that contingency staffing. The reason that you see the arrow continue after it is approved is that we do monitor that allocation throughout the year because enrollment does go up and down. If we have allocated an aid, there's potential that the enrollment goes down and an aid may no longer be an option for that grade level. And I'll be going over that with that process as well. This is directly out of Section 15, Maintenance of Class Loads, so I am going to go through these with you. A period not to exceed 3 weeks shall be allowed to determine if the need is constant. If it is, a new teacher or teacher aide shall be hired if space and funds are available. If the grade level holds for 3 weeks, we make the recommendation, and that's when it goes to cabinet. And we can do it sooner than that. If we see that there are a lot of kids sitting there, or that there are many open enrollment applications sitting there, we can trigger it a lot sooner, and we often do. Only aides shall be hired after the 100th day of the school year, and I cannot remember a time ever that we have had to do this because we usually have all of our enrollment addressed by the 100th day. And then the district administration shall determine if there are available funds in the budget to hire additional teachers or teacher aides, and the district will work with the school administration to address the over-enrolled area. And that's typically based on physical capacity and unique needs of that area, too. Here is this year's formula for staffing. So if this aligns with the district administration shall determine if there are available funds, we also have to determine the formula that's going to be used. So this year, allocations are as follows. A 4-hour aid is allocated to any grade level that has an overage, and one student can trigger an overage. So as soon as one student is over for 3 weeks, we allocate that 4 hours. Kindergarten is a little different. At the kindergarten grade level, because of the unique needs of a kindergarten student, they are allocated 1 hour, 15 minutes per teacher at that grade level. And then teachers are allocated a teacher. So the grade level will be given a teacher when each teacher at that grade level has 2 over, and one of the teachers has 3 over. So if you had 2 teachers, you would need a total of 5 extra kids to trigger a teacher after we are maintaining. And then again, beginning the 100th day, only aid time may be allocated. There are some exceptions here as well to the teacher allocation. One might be, I recall doing this at Stetson Hills. They do not have the physical capacity to add another teacher. They don't have a classroom to put another teacher. So they may elect instead for a full-time aide for that grade level. And they do have that option if that were to occur. If you recall, at the end of last year with the passage of Prop 123, you approved the allocation of 12 FTE for us for contingency staffing, which we were extremely grateful for. So 12 at the beginning of this year. We also were able to add 4.4 back in at the beginning of the year because certain areas were under-enrolled. To date, we have allocated 14.8 FTE certified staffing. And to date, we have allocated 1.8 FTE classified staffing. That does not include para-staffing. And that would be office clerks. Basically, the 1.88 represents office clerks. And we have a remaining contingency right now of a negative 0.2. So we are now over allocation. This is last year, the use of our contingency allocation. So this will give you shed light to how grateful we were to receive that 12 FTE. Last year, we had 7 FTE. We were able to add back 5. We allocated 17.06, and by the end of the year, we were negative 5.06. But last year, we did add 7 additional teachers. We added 16 different aides to different grade levels, and open enrollment applications were considered in each of those situations. This is what this year looks like. We have added 8.2 additional FTE. 9 of those were teachers, and 2 additional sections given to middle and high schools. 8 different grade levels across the district have been allocated. Aid time and open enrollment applications were reviewed as part of all of those allocations. This year, we also have added 19 additional paras that don't come out of the contingency. Last year, we added an additional 45 paras that didn't, Michelle just corrected, 49 paras that did not come out of contingency. So key points, and going through our entire staffing cycle, we do want to reiterate that we monitor weekly our staffing and our enrollment, that open enrollment has significant influence on all of our allocations. Staffing allocations follow board-approved negotiated agreements. Our enrollment overages are consistently addressed year to year based on the availability of the budget, so that would be the formula that we develop each year to address the overage, and that contingency staffing is critical to maintaining class loads. The next slide is questions.
Okay, actually, let me go start first, and I'll pass the microphone. Going back, when you calculate, you use roll-up from grade to grade. Have we kind of trended to figure out where we're increasing or decreasing in our roll-ups? In other words, generally speaking, are we? I know in high school we get kids that didn't come from the district. Are there trends there that we can identify and maybe address them specifically?
President Gregoire, yes, and that is what we look for in the demographer's report as well. So we're looking at all that information that would include new development as well. So new housing starts, things that, other factors that would contribute to changes in projected enrollment. We don't use the demographer's report for staffing. We use it more for long-term planning and for making adjustments to the roll-up. So where we take a fourth grader and assume that they're going to be a fifth grader the following year, we might also take a look at other changes that would happen during that transition period as a result of the information we learned from the demographic study that's done annually.
Okay, thank you. Next question I had is, we were talking about class size, and when we calculate the middle school for regular teachers versus the number of kids, I did the math and came out with one teacher, gen ed teacher, for every 28 kids. But when I did it for the Anthem school, for 28 kids, you should only have 6.5 teachers, but we have 8.5. Is there an explanation why it takes 2 more teachers to handle?
K-8 campuses are staffed differently at the middle school than middle schools are staffed, and that is because of the constraints of a K-8 configuration. So instead, at a K-8, the middle school has a base staffing. They receive 4 automatic allocation for the core areas at 7th grade, 4 automatic at the 8th grade, and then there's a formula used to determine how much additional staffing is going to be given for exploratories.
Okay, so they do exploratories as well. Mm-hmm. Okay, that answers, I think, some of that question. Also, I know we have a policy, or that we don't, after the 100th day, we only hire an aide. But it would seem to me that that's probably a good time when we should hire a full-time teacher, because we get those winter graduates from ASU and U of A, and if we can offer them full-time and we can have them for next year instead of you having to do all your recruiting in April and May, we can grab, it's a little more tougher on the budget, but it guarantees us a better teacher market. So again, that's just a comment I have, that maybe we should change that. If we can grab a teacher and hire them right out of graduating this semester, let's do it.
Mr. Gregoire, if I could speak to that,
yeah.
If that's okay. That is speaking specifically to an over-enrolled area. We do hire teachers after the 100th day for vacancies. We offer contracts sometimes after the 100th day for vacancies as well.
Okay, again, I don't know if we get them filled up or not. And the last question I had is, you were talking about the paras, how we had to add 49 extra last year, then 19 this year. Where's the funding for that? That special, is that because we're lacking special ed teachers? Is that, so that instead of paying special ed teachers, we're paying paras? That makes sense.
I can answer why a para.
Yeah, because you said we had to increase 49 paras in last year. This year was 19.
Yes, that is true. So 49 last year, 19 this year. The paras are requested based on the para minutes required in an IEP and not the teacher minutes. So if they cannot map, if they do not have enough paras on their campus to meet all of the minutes that all of their students need, then they remap. They have student support services take a look at their request, and if it is deemed that they cannot meet those minutes and they do need an additional para, then they request an
I know
additional para.
49 is a lot of funding. Where did that money come from?
President Gregoire, the funding for that comes out of contingency funds that we had. And last year, we actually received student growth funding, especially for our special ed population, or what's referred to in the funding formula as Group B weights.
Okay. Anyway, that's all the questions I had. Ann had some.
We're on the special ed student, the load section, where it says K6 and K8, the teachers of record that are the special ed teachers will have 15 IEPs. So if you are a gen ed teacher, how many kids with IEPs do you have?
There is no cap for the amount of IEPs you can have as a gen ed teacher.
Okay. And then if you're a special area teacher, say you are a music teacher and you teach 600 kids, how many IEPs are you responsible for there?
There is no formula for that either.
And is there a reason why we don't have a formula for that? I'm just wondering.
I guess I can't answer that question. I could make a guess at it. It could. The responsibility of the special education teacher is to manage the IEP and also to manage the specialized instruction. The gen ed teacher's responsibility typically is to accommodate and follow the accommodation list and follow the direction of the special education teacher if there is a modification or specialized instruction.
Right, so I just to throw it out there, I think that if you're a special area teacher and you're responsible for all of those accommodations or modifications for that many kids, that maybe there's something, I don't know what, maybe one of the administrators, the principals could answer that. How do those people, those teachers get all that information?
President Gregoire, Mrs. Ordway, what we do is we make sure that every single teacher that has contact with that child gets the accommodations page of the IEP. They're also invited to the IEP meetings, and then they make sure that they are making sure those accommodations happen. There are also paras that go into the specials classes with students with higher needs to make sure that those accommodations are met.
So really, a special area teacher would be responsible for knowing a lot of kids.
A lot, yes.
Okay, I was just wondering what we do with that. And so that... Can I add to that? Oh, sure. I mean, right, yeah, sure.
I know that other campuses also set up.
Wait.
I think a couple other important things that we do is we set up meetings at the beginning of the year and mid-year at our campus and take time, our service coordinators who are in charge of those students on IEPs, take time to meet with all of the special area teachers more formally so that we can pull them in. And then also they are invited to all of the IEP meetings. When accommodations are changed, they're part of that process. They're part of that team.
And that sounds good. I'm just saying that if you're a special area teacher, that would be 600 invites you get.
It's a lot.
Maybe. I
Yeah.
don't know how many you get.
Yeah,
It just,
it's a lot.
just occurred to me that that's a lot.
It's a lot.
Okay, and then on the maintenance of class loads, we have the district administration will determine if there are available funds. So what happens if it is determined that there are not enough funds? What then does the person that needs the funds do, that is asked for the funding?
It's an excellent question. We have not had that situation come up yet. Mr. Miglarino is very resourceful. As I shared, we are over contingency. We were well over contingency last year. We are a little over contingency this year, and we've been able to address every overage so far. Really what that language does allow us to do is predict and make adjustments. I do recall my own memory being here for 14 years, much of it as the building level administrator, that sometimes every year looked a little bit different. The amount that would be allocated to us for an over-enrolled area could be a little bit more one year and a little bit less the following year because of the budget.
Okay, and then at this moment, my last question, not forever, is when we determine that it's after the 100th day and we're not going to do a teacher, and I do understand sort of kind of why, but then we say that we're going to give that teacher aid time. If it was the 85th day, we would get a teacher. Right? So as a parent, how do we sell the fact that if it was 15 days earlier, you would get a certified teacher, and now you're getting an aide that, what does the aide do for the teacher? Some questions that roll around.
Special circumstances are discussed between a building and human resources, and those circumstances are brought into cabinet. So I say that because that could be discussed. The reason I shared that it's never happened before is because it is very rare in today's day. Unfortunately, our enrollment tends to go down a little bit. It might come up a little bit, but we're not going through a huge boom. Maybe in a boom, you might see that all of the sudden a grade level had 20 kids that enrolled and you would need a teacher. By the 100th day, we are not in that situation anymore because in the first couple of months, we have addressed all of our overages, and there isn't a whole lot of movement at that point in enrollment between campuses. If it did occur and we did desperately need a teacher, it would likely, we would be able to approve that. Or we would be able to make a recommendation for approval to cabinet.
I want to ask first, and I apologize, but for my ignorance, a student has just one IEP. There's never a situation where they would have more than one IEP, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. In the Sandra Day O'Connor example you gave us, campus-funded teacher on assignment, so that's funded from their discretionary funds that they have from their class. Thank you. Got that back. What is magic about the 3-week number in holding the overage?
The selection of 3 weeks has been in the certified manual for a very, very long time. So I would imagine that the 3 weeks was picked after studying enrollment for quite a long period of time, and the agreement between DVEA and the district that 3 weeks was a sufficient amount of time to watch the enrollment go up or down, and after 3 weeks, the district would need to make a decision. They wouldn't want to go any further than that amount of time.
Okay, thank you. And then on the formula that gives an aid, I apologize, I didn't get your explanation regarding the aids that are given to kindergarten, at the kindergarten level for 1 hour and 15 minutes. Mm-hmm. Can you re-explain that?
Mm-hmm. We had a group of kindergarten teachers who we initially allocated 4 hours of aid time to. And after conversation, we realized that 4 hours wasn't quite enough with the amount of transition and physical attention that is needed from a teacher to a kindergarten student, especially during the first semester. they're learning how to be a student. And so they needed extra time for transition, and they requested that we might consider extra time for that transition. If we could just have a little bit more time, because an aide moves from classroom to classroom, could you consider that? And so that was wrapped up into cabinet and approved with the understanding that there is a unique need at that level. So that is why they have the extra time compared to the other grade levels.
Okay. Thank you. And that's all my questions right now.
I'm just going to pass the microphone down if anybody will do them in order. So, Jenny.
Okay. Actually, I do have a question about the student contact at high school. And of course, I taught at a K-6, so this is a little uncharted territory for me. So the student contact per teacher is 170 students. So my question is, what is done, or is there a procedure or policy in place to address the number of students that get scheduled into each class? So an example would be my youngest son, as a high school senior, had 40 kids in his language arts class. There weren't enough desks for everyone to sit in. There were a lot of behavior problems. So you could say that teacher only had 170 contacts, but yet my son's education was negatively impacted by an overcrowded classroom. And the same thing happened in a math section when he was a junior in actually a SPED math class that had 34 kids in it. So I guess my concern is, you hold to that student load per teacher, but what can be done to ensure that a teacher doesn't have a class that's got 40, 45 kids in it?
You brought up a hot topic. This tends to be a topic that we discuss in NST each year. There is language around that. So the language reads that the school has the responsibility to level out their classroom so that that does not occur. The number that they're supposed to be trying to work to be near, and the language does say near, is 37. We do know that we have classrooms across the district that are over 37. And some of those are because teachers choose or opt to have a number that's a little bit higher, knowing that there could be 5 more students that really want to be in that advanced class, and so they say, I will go ahead and take them. That is for some. Others, it's very stressful to have those numbers that are higher. So that is a discussion between the administrator and the staff member. Human Resources does become involved in that process sometimes when they can't seem to figure out a solution. So we might get involved in helping them redesign their master schedule. And in some situations when we see that there are indeed actually too many students and we can't balance out and the formula applies, we would be allocating additional FTE.
Okay, so it does sound like there is a need for some flexibility. As you say, with an advanced class, a teacher might want to take those extra 5 students, but my experience as a parent was a SPED math class where I was told by an administrator, this is the way it is, and then an English language arts class where my son came home and said, I've given up, I can't even think, and that was not addressed. So those would be some things to look at and think about going forward. Again, I understand the need for flexibility in some situations where that extra 5 students might be desirable. But anyway, just my thoughts.
Oh, before you do that, and I just want to preface it, that's exactly why we're here, is try to give suggestions. And then when this subject comes up for the budget and all the works, that you have kind of a direction from the board going forward. So anyway, thanks, Jenny.
And thank you very much for your answer. I appreciate it.
I just had a couple questions too. I was going to ask Jenny's question, but I also had a different situation with that. So some parents had contacted me because their students didn't pass high school classes. And then when they were trying to retake it, there wasn't room in the schedule, so they weren't able to always get their graduation requirements scheduled. So I'm not sure, and I've also situations of really overcrowded rooms. So with 170 contact hours, it does seem there should be a limit on how many kids could be in a class, and that we'd still have to make sure, even if it meant a teacher, we had to get another teacher or go over, that all the students could take graduation requirements, because to have students go somewhere else or not be able to get in a credit, recovery, or it's just that was the one thing. And then on the special education page, with the ratios, let me flip to that page. So the service hours in the IEP, are they considered, I mean, and how many IEPs you would manage? Because a student who maybe only had a very small or an uncomplicated IEP, I mean, IEP, one case could look different if you have 2 students. And in even thinking of staffing schools, they may have a different number of students who need services, and those students could either be higher or lower needs. So is that taken into account in the staffing?
I would answer that in that it was addressed through the reorganization. That idea is why they had they phased into base model at campuses. The IEP loads, though, when you're describing the difference between one that might need 15 minutes of behavioral intervention a day versus the person that has related services and other items and is more time consuming, that is typically handled at the campus in balancing out the type of IEPs that a teacher might have. It is true, though, that there are campuses that have quite a heavy load of those types of students, and so you might have more of those type of IEPs on this campus versus a campus over here.
Yeah, I would just be concerned with that, and then even the staffing allocation per school, that if we don't consider in the formula the service hours of the students at that school, that some schools may not have enough help. So that's just my thoughts. Thank you.
Okay, got notes everywhere. Well, since we're on well, we're talking about the maintenance. Let's go to the maintenance. So you're saying the teacher allocated when each teacher is 2 over, and 1 teacher is 3 over. So essentially, it's really not when we're just over. We have to be 5 over, and for how long?
It really it depends on the amount of teachers, but it would be for 3 weeks. You would be holding that number for 3 weeks.
So then our cap really isn't at what we have it set at. It's 5 more than that. So if our cap is 37, it's not. It's 42, or the issue I have is we have classrooms that are exploding and teachers that can't handle them. When the original numbers were set, were they set with the understanding that we were going to not really, the cap wasn't really a cap, it was only a cap until everyone had exploded the cap? Because it's not just 1 over. 1 over for 3 weeks, you may get an aid. But then you're not going to see any more assistance until you actually have all the classes in that grade excessively over, and then we'll look at a teacher. So what is our true, do we have a number of what our true bubble is, our true cap is? Because it doesn't sound to me like if our bubble is 42, it doesn't pop at 42, it pops at 48.
So I'll begin with the allocations are true allocations when we staff. And then when the budget locks down, there is language to give us that flexibility because of the budget. So yes, that is a true number, and then we have to address it if it goes over after budget locks down. So some years it has been generous and we could trigger a teacher. In other years, it's a little bit more restrictive and we trigger an aid. What we're responsible for is addressing it if it does go over. So it still is a true number because we're paying attention to that number.
Okay, so it's a true number in the staffing model, but not in the kids' world.
Potentially, if they were sitting there, if they sat in a classroom that was high in number.
Okay.
And then you didn't allocate a teacher.
Okay, since we're talking money and that as well, Jim you mentioned when we were talking about the funds for the para that we paid for those additional with the growth funds. How is our current being on a current year model going to change that for us? we're not going to have those growth funds, or have they addressed, I mean, you get current year, so technically you've already gotten your growth, and we were not held harmless this year, but next year we will. So do we have contingency funds for those type of things if, say, next year we do need those additional paras?
So to answer your question, we have contingency funds built into the budget. I believe this year's budget has $200,000 worth of contingency funds built in it. It's on the cover page of the gold book. It's not, it's information that we share readily. Last year was an anomaly because we received sudden growth for both our gen ed population and our special ed population. For this year and years moving forward, we'll be funded on current year funding. So if we get more students than we actually projected, we would get that additional funding. It just won't be called sudden growth funding. Unfortunately, this year, we're declining in students, which will be held harmless for this year. But next year, if we continue to decline, it will mean that we'll have less resources. So we're going to have to build in a greater contingency into all future budgets as we continue to look at being faced with current year funding.
So with that decline, it's going to be double then, essentially, because we're held harmless now. So next year we have this year plus next year in the decline, correct? If we're held harmless this year, so, but we still had decline. Next year we have decline, you get the full hit of the double number.
That would be correct if we decline next year. So I mean, I don't know that we are or aren't going to decline, but we do have to create a plan, assuming that there could be a loss of revenue as a result of that decline.
Okay, so then when we're looking at these numbers for not only staffing but for budgeting, we need to make sure that we have a contingency that's great enough to take up everything else as well as those potential additional paras. Okay, let's go to the next question. You said that you start looking in December and then you start looking as well at the cohort movement of students. But when I look at your numbers, I don't see, because maybe I'm looking at your chart wrong. I see the enrollment, but I don't see it projected. So, I mean, because generally you'll move, you know, first to second, second to third, third to fourth, but I don't see a consistent in the numbers. So are you going with this enrollment and then the demographers? Are you looking at a 2-year to get that? I mean, what is that movement that you're looking at?
So when we create the initial staffing sheets, we actually do a cohort roll-up, so 3rd to 4th grade. 3rd grader will be 4th grader next year. And then we make adjustments to those numbers based on trend. So we take into account trend and this happens mostly when a student population transitions from one school to another. So from a K-6 to a middle school, from middle school to high school, we see trend numbers. We used to see trend numbers in our primary grades before we reinstituted full-day kindergarten. And we would see, we would have to increase our primary grade numbers by upwards of 10% or more kindergarten to 1st grade, because they would go find another option for full-day kindergarten and then come back between 1st and 2nd grade. We would get the students back. We no longer have to make an adjustment for 1st grade since full-day kindergarten's been in place now for a couple years. But we do make adjustments to that. What we did note for this year is, especially when it came to our high school populations, the roll-up numbers were not indicative of what we actually realized. And so we made a lot of adjustments in those first couple weeks of this school year with high school numbers. And so we've asked the demographer to look at that specifically in the report that he's preparing for us in the next month or so.
What do we have him looking at?
High school, we give him student level information. So he's going to track SACE ID numbers from 8th grade to their 9th grade, and then also look at the student population. We're going to try and graphically show this with the high school boundaries showing the student of residence home overlaid on top of the actual high school boundaries. So you would be able to see that a student that lives in the, for example, Barry Goldwater High School boundary, but is attending Sandra Day O'Connor, you'd be able to graphically see them.
Are we looking at surrounding programs? Do they look at that?
Schools outside of our district? We look at charter and private schools, but just on the fringe of our boundary. We don't look at other district programs like Peoria School or Paradise Valley School. That information is not readily available to us.
Their programs aren't readily available?
We don't know a student that attends another school that actually resides in our
No,
camp.
I got that. But are we looking at what programs are being offered around us? In other words, I mean, we can look at the charters, we can look at these other schools, but you know, for an example, if we know we're losing students on the east side, and we know that that's kind of more towards industry, well, it may be that you put a specialty school there that's going to grab that. So they're essentially going to take students from the neighboring district. So are we looking at, in other words, I guess, what would ours be? Peoria, Paradise Valley, Glendale Union, Glendale L, well, no, Washington is up here. So what, are we looking, what's more high schools, but are we looking at what programs they're maybe offering? And it may be something that we even have, that Westmec does or something, but maybe Greenway's closer or Glendale's closer or something like that. Are we looking at programs?
Not initially in the demographer's report. We're trying to look at the data to, that's getting into solutions. And then we want the data to be able to be, somewhat prescriptive as to what we need to look at. And as soon as we see that we're losing a large percentage of a population, for example, then we'll need to certainly get a little more granular with that information and do as you suggest.
Okay. Getting to where we were talking about leveling out. Sorry, my questions are everywhere. We're talking about leveling out there. Is there a set process, or is it campus discretionary completely? In other words, does a teacher have a path, or group of teachers have a path?
For leveling specifically?
Yeah, in other words, is it just with their campus, or do we have the district says, if you have an issue, this is step 1, step 2, step 3. Do we have a path for them?
The manual does say that the teacher is to approach their administrator to let them know if the administrator, really the school should already know, the counselor should know, the registrar should know what their class loads look like. However, if they missed something, the employee may notify the administrator who has the responsibility to work to resolve it. If they can't resolve it, they can't seem to come up with a solution, they then contact Human Resources.
Okay, so through our employee relations, kind of just like following the regular path. And I think I have I think this is the final question. When you were talking about preparing your staffing, you talked about, you look at the campuses will let you know programs that are being added or changed or moved. Is there a process for what programs are going to be at what campuses? Is that discretionary to the campus? Hey, I think today we're going to do X, Y, or Z. Is there a process to get that? I mean, who determines what program's going to go where? Because that can't just be arbitrary, I'm sure.
Currently, the process because that's gone through many phases in my history here anyway, how programs were determined on campuses. Currently, Dr. Galligan, I believe, and if I answer this incorrectly, I'm sure Dr. Weitenheimer will step in, but she has put a process together that if a campus wants to pitch a program or any different design really in the delivery of instruction, then they go through this process for review and it's ultimately approved by cabinet.
Is there an AMG for that? Sounds like an advertisement.
Yes.
Can we get it? Yes. Thank you. I think that's all I had.
Okay. We just have a couple more questions from Ann and Ann.
One more question for now. Where it says counselors 7th through 12th grade, are we really at 450 per counselor?
Can you say that again? I'm sorry.
It says that our numbers per counselor, 7th through 12th grade, is 450. How close are we to that? Or
Based off of memory, there's one school that was over this year, and we allocated a 6/5 that direction because there were they were over enrolled. Otherwise, we are enrolled based on that number, yes, or we are staffed based on that formula.
Okay. Any more comments? And again, I think, read what you will from the board comments, that I think this has been an issue for a lot of us about staffing and how it's done. And I think we all just want the best for our kids, but, you know, it's all about budgets and things. So anyway, with that being said, I think we should move on to our next subject, which is negotiation solution team discussion. Jim, are you going to kind of take this?
President Gregoire, yes, I was planning on doing this. I think I'm coming down with something, so I'm glad that many of the members of the NST are here. So I think we'll just take a slide apiece. I'll start with the first one. Oh, maybe not. But I do reserve the right to have other people help answer some of the questions. And I know there are going to be some people that want to provide some insight. Really, the objective here is to just provide an overview of the our employee negotiation process. But more specifically, try and get feedback from the board and from others. It is a study session as to the process that we will use to develop next year's budget. So that's kind of the intent of this. Oh, I guess remember what I'm doing here. I should have learned from Miss Moffett. I'm going to multitask. I think I'm going to. Yeah. Need an extra hand. So although the process has changed over the years, there's been a long-standing history of having an employee negotiation process in place. It was win-win at one time. It's been interest-based negotiation. Of late, it's been what we refer to as NST, or Negotiation Solutions Team. And it's been in place since about 2009, 2010, thereabouts, so about 7 years. And it has been successful in those 7 years. I'm maybe a little bit biased because I'm intimately involved in it, but we've made more than $84 million worth of state-imposed cuts to the budget during that period using this process, and it's also been in conjunction with declining enrollment. So the process has worked. And I will say that last year was not normal. The process was challenging because for the first time we had some additional resources, and we had a lot of pent-up demand with all those years of reductions. But we still were able to develop a process that met the interests of everybody that was involved in that process. So some of those reductions we have some control over, like we lost our capital override funding during that period of time, so voter-approved initiatives. We don't necessarily have a direct say in that, but we determine whether or not we're going to ask the voters to even consider that. And when they rejected that back in 2012, we decided not to go back out again for any capital funds. So that all happened during this period of time using the negotiation solution process. I've just provided excerpts from the employee manual here. So this is existing language. I'll note later in the presentation that we do need to make some modifications to some of this language. There isn't an administrative employee manual. So the Deer Valley Building Leadership Team, or BLT as we refer to them, aren't represented here because there isn't a manual. But Governing Board Policy GBB does recognize them as a group. So won't show up necessarily in the manuals, but as we go further through this information, you'll see that there's There's operating procedures for the negotiation solution team. It's an appendix to the employee manuals. We believe that does need to be altered in what we're referring to as conforming language changes. We'll get to that a little bit later. There is a focus that's identified here in the guidelines to focus on salary, benefits, employee rights, and the terms and conditions of employment. So that's kind of the scope of work. That can't really happen in a vacuum, or at least absent a discussion about budget. So we do program that into to our process. And each group is charged with gathering the interests for their respective group. Here, speaking of the procedures, then again, this is just copying the information right from the appendix and sharing it here. Once again, this does need to be modified to include the Deer Valley Building Leadership Team, or BLT. Has to be added in here. There's several slides here. I won't read these to you, but this is the governing document for these. Because these are in the manual, they're reviewed annually and approved by the governing board, and there is a debrief process that's built into the NST process, which is here. And communication has been a focus of improvement for this year. Just wanted to note. So we have constituency feedback and ratification processes that are outlined in those procedures. This year we are, and this is new for this year, we are posting agendas and what we're referring to as a summary on our portal of those meetings. And so that information is not only available to those folks that actually attend the meetings, but anybody else that would want to see what type of effort had taken place during those meetings. There was some discussion about what to title this slide, so if you don't like the title, I'm sorry. It wasn't intended to be anything other than just to try and give you an idea of some of the activities that surround this process. So there is a monthly budget informational meeting, and those happen at the start of the year, September through May. This is one of the things that we learned as we debriefed from the IBN process, is that we tried to cram all the information regarding the budget into a very limited amount of time. It was much easier to be able to digest that over the course of the school year, and so we do that monthly. Those meetings coincide with the first board meeting of the month, and in addition, we schedule additional meetings to develop the salary and benefit recommendation. That typically happens between February and April, and so there are several additional meetings beyond just the monthly September through May meetings. The May meeting is typically the debrief meeting, so we've typically concluded the work and are just debriefing as is prescribed in the procedures. We also have what we call language committee meetings, or employee manual meetings. Those are conducted by the employee groups individually. So when we have the NST monthly budget informational meetings, it's the whole group, so we have all employee groups represented there. The language committee meetings are actually just those that are affected by that language. Any information that comes from the language committee meeting that would potentially impact another group then comes back through the monthly budget informational meeting as well. Those are scheduled on an as-needed basis. And just as an example of a subcommittee, also identified in the procedures, but there is a benefit committee that has similar representation. Sometimes it's actually the same representation of the NST, but they help work on our employee benefit offerings each year. That recommendation from the employee benefit committee actually gets routed back through the NST group and becomes part of the recommendation that ultimately gets brought before the governing board by the NST themselves. So just an example of activities that we have as part of this process. I mentioned earlier that we do have some conforming language changes that we need to consider. DVBLT is one of those, so the building leadership team needs to be included in the operating procedures. We have heard some additional feedback about public input meetings, or just specifying a process. It's identified in the procedures, but we want to make sure that we have a public process for the gathering of that information. We have left that up to the groups to decide on their own how they would gather their own interest. But I think we want to make sure that that includes the opportunity for those that they are representing, a means to be able to share their insight, as they are intended to be representative of the entire group. And then we've also been working on an employee representation matrix. So every position in the district would know who's representing them within this process, within the NST process. So if I'm a custodian, I would know who my representative is in this particular process, as an example. We have a list of considerations that we've shared with the board. This is a result of the salary and benefit recommendations that were considered and approved, and these are in no particular order. There was one that was on this list that we've already addressed this year, which was taking care of the professional growth credit for teachers, and that has already been resolved, so I did not list that here. It's not to say that these are the things that we're going to address each of these things. This is kind of our starting point based on the feedback that we received as of last year. So items that we're looking to at least consider in our discussions for this year. As was mentioned previously, current year funding implications are a new consideration for us that we're going to have to make a plan for. I think that what that's going to look like is we're going to have to drastically increase our contingency amount. We've historically had, as I mentioned, $200,000 in contingency built into the budget. If we are projecting to decline, we are going to have to increase that several fold over again, just because of the implications that current year funding will have on our district. And then we came up with an administrative recommendation, and this presentation was shared with the NST. We didn't meet to, we had a virtual meeting, I guess, so they were at least aware of the content. But we're recommending that we keep the negotiation solutions team in place for the development of a salary and benefit recommendation for next year. We think it's important to confirm the role of NST. I mentioned before, it's salary, benefits, working conditions, things of that nature. And it's important that we get the board input early in the process. Sometimes we feel like we don't know what parameters we have to operate as a committee in terms of what might be taboo or what are some interests that we need to address. We were just talking about some staffing things. If those things need to be addressed, we would like to know those as we're working through those processes in advance of bringing a recommendation to you that may have them be absent in that recommendation. We want to make sure that we're meeting your expectations as well. We need to establish some milestones. We have some built into a budget calendar. Those were also mentioned as we were talking about the staffing information that was presented earlier. But I think identifying those in advance as part of those expectations and the role of NST would be helpful so that everybody has an idea of some of the timelines. We have typically targeted to bring the salary and benefit recommendation to the board in April, preferably the first meeting in April. Hasn't always happened. There are some things that are outside of our control, what's happening at the legislature, things of that nature. But we'd like to memorialize those so that people have an idea of what what timeframes we need to work within to be able to meet those expectations. And then we have a board policy, DBD, that actually prescribes kind of the budget framework. We've heard some discussion about how is the budget amount determined. And just I provided this as kind of a for example. So for the 2016-17 year, we would have the 2015 annual financial report data, the comparison data, and that's what policy DBD says is that we have to, our salary and benefit percentage has to be greater than the 5 comparable districts average of their salary and benefits. So if you were to rewind a year ago, we would have the fiscal year 15 AFR data, and we would project what the 2016-17 budget would look like. We can take that percentage, and we need to be greater than that. So in this case, 85.6%. And so we would know what the salary and benefit offerings would need to look like moving forward, $163.9 million on a $191 million budget. And I presented this information without Prop 123 because at the time that we would have known this, we would not have had the Prop 123 information. So just kind of representing it in a fashion that we would have looked at. Obviously, we know now that Prop 123 did pass. And so our budget is almost, it's another $6.8 million, $6.7 million greater than that. But the information that's represented here would be indicative of what we would have known at the time that we would have been working on it as a committee, as the NST. So we think the process has been effective. We think that there are always opportunities for some improvements. We've outlined some of them here, and want to get some feedback from the board, as well as allow the opportunity of other NST members that really give up a great deal of their time to this cause, the opportunity to also share some of their insights as well.
Okay, I think we'll throw it out to the NST committee. Anybody else want to speak on this? Any comments? Seeing none. Oh, here we go.
Without having a microphone, am I loud enough?
No, you need it because we got to record it.
It's recording?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't want to say anything then. No, I just, rumors flow around, and I guess before I think any of us really know what to say, we kind of want to know what thoughts are being tossed around from the board for potential changes. I mean, I've heard things like, we're only supposed to be dealing with the salary and benefits. Well, when that's 85% of the budget, how are we supposed to do anything with calculating what we should be, basing that on if we don't also include everything else that's in the budget, the other 15% of the district expenses? They kind of go together. So, and I may be speaking out of context or inappropriately or unknowledgeably, but what I'm hearing is that there have been concerns that we have overstepped our boundaries, and I don't know how you can deal with 85% of the budget without considering the rest of it to balance it all together. And over 8 years, 4 or more that I've been on it, they've dealt with cuts and cuts and cuts. And this last year, we had money to be able to provide some financial relief to some of our employees. Unfortunately, not everybody had the same feeling that they were grateful for what they got. It wasn't even across the board. We didn't do this on a percentage basis. That would not have been even. That's why we had the problems we had with certified, and we're going to start to have those with classified with this Prop 206 that passed. We're going to have this compression where you're going to have brand new people making the same that tenure people have been making. So I guess I'm just going to end with that, saying that I think they need to be considered collectively. The way we've been doing it, I believe, has been very successful. So I'll leave it at that.
Maria.
Speaking on behalf of Certified, I think DVA, of course, is going to endeavor to help educate our employees as far as school finance. There was a question that was brought up in Communication Council this afternoon. I mean, it would be great to have lower class sizes or to have more aides or to have more pairs or whatever. But the analogy was there. I mean, our budget is a finite number. So if we're going to add somewhere else, that it only stands to logic that we have to take from another place. And I think employees would get caught up and people ask questions like, why can't we start negotiating our salary now? Well, there's a lot of things, and that goes back to the education piece. I think that Deer Valley University or some professional development or some sort of class. I mean, I've been studying school finance since 2007, and I've been going religiously to these classes to educate myself in the ever-changing world of school finance. And I think that the district can do itself to start educating its own workforce and offering them a half a credit or something in professional development just on school finance to get them to understand how we are allocated money by the state and how it's so important that they be educated voters and community members when it comes to school finance. Like Jim said in the opening slide, I mean, we managed to weather the storm, preserve jobs through the $84 million in cuts. And yeah, we were out of practice. We were 8 years out of practice when it came to allocating money. And so when it all happened at a fury pace, and if you remember, because I had to look, Prop 123 was voted on in May 17, I believe. So we couldn't get any closer to the ending date. And then after then, it didn't pass that night. You know, it just kind of crept along. So I think knowing that, and it was, yes, it was an atypical year, I still think that there's a great learning opportunity for this district and for the employees at large to learn more about school finance, especially in Arizona.
Anybody else? Okay, I just have one suggestion, and this kind of goes back to the IBN days without making it an IBN committee. One of the things we did when we started off was we had the board had its ideas on the table. In other words, suggestion members, we were made suggestions. The cabinet had their things that they wanted to do. Now, and then each group has their own wants and needs. What I would think, and in the past we've done this in executive session, drive me crazy, that maybe we should, at least for the board and the cabinet, is to have a study session before NST actually kicks in and say, hey, this is what we want or desire or need for this coming year, and these are our goals, and cabinet will need to come out too, say, hey, we need this program and that program, or cut this program. They need to declare. So by the time you guys are at NST, there's no requirements that pop up at the end there. Everybody knows what's on the table, and then you guys can work as equals in figuring out, because I think a lot of times you guys think you get blindsided by a board mandate later on, or a cabinet mandate that, hey, why is that there? You know, you don't understand where it came from. So if we can get that cleared out before the September process, say, you know, first in late August, you have that study session, and then when you meet in earnest and start hammering out the details and such. So anyway, with that, I'll pass the mic. Start at this side. Kim, do you have any comments?
I think maybe, because I'm sure some of my comments have added to your belief that it's maybe overstepping, and I think it's not. What confuses me with the budgeting and the NST, and maybe because of it's what I've seen in other districts, it's not that the various groups don't have a voice at the table in the budget committee, but it is that nobody else has a voice in Deer Valley. I've never seen that anywhere else. The models that I've always seen, and it may just be the model I'm familiar with, so it's what I'm comfortable with, is you have a budget committee. On the budget committee is obviously Jim and his team, a member from each group selected by the group. It's generally open to 2 additional teachers. 1 or 2 additional teachers, doesn't have to, it's not a set amount. 1 or 2 additional staff members. Generally 1 or 2 additional administrators, whether it's district office administration or campus. And then a couple of community members. And they discuss the overall budget. They discuss, okay, we need to cut. We need to cut X amount. Where can we look for energy savings? Is there a potential for, and we look at, and the times when I've had to do it and been on those and been running those budget committees, I mean, it's everything to, we decide we are going to shut down X buildings of a school for these months because our energy savings will be this much. We're taking it down to the dollars. So that's your budget committee. They come up with your budget. At the same time, there is the NST, or the negotiations of salaries, benefits. Same players, not same players, but same teams discussing salaries and benefits. The last meeting of the 2 meetings, the 2 groups come together. We did a dual horseshoe, 1 committee, and we hammered out the rest. Because it's I don't see any transparency whatsoever. Everything I have seen, as long as I have seen anything in Deer Valley, is everything is closed-door meetings where nobody sees anything other than the 8 people who are always in those meetings. And when the message starts going back out to everywhere, it's, well, no, that's not what they said, that's what I said. So I see a lot of bickering, and it's like, well, then open the meetings. Open the meetings. Have these, the meetings I've always seen have been public meetings. No, the public can't speak, but when we had our budget committee, we had a room where our budget committee was, and there was a row of chairs. And Joe Bag of Donuts can walk in and sit there, and he can watch and see exactly where his tax dollars are going. And a teacher who may be, or a mechanic who maybe is not a member of the organization, but is still a member of this family, they can come in and they want to see, you know, we don't know why they don't. I'm not a member of the administrators at my district because it's $500 a year. I'm not going to pay that. They could have a million reasons. I guess my point is I think everyone needs to be at the table. We need to have transparency. We're going to ask our community for their vote for an override, for their vote for a bond, for their, you know, for their children to trust us to educate them. And when you're going to tell them, trust me with your taxes, trust me with your children, trust me with this all, excuse me, we're going into a closed meeting which you cannot attend, and we'll let you know what parts we'll let you know. They're not going to trust us. So for me, I'm looking for transparency. I'm looking for everybody having a seat at the table and open communication so that there's a productive system in general.
May I respond to that? Go ahead. Go first. I guess I would agree that transparency is a very important thing, but I will make the statement after hearing all that it starts with the board giving the direction to the committees, and in my opinion, it hasn't been done except by knee-jerk, last second, and so I take a little offense to some of the comment, and I'm not trying to be mad, or I'm not trying to be anything else other than just respond to what you're saying. If you want us to be more transparent and you want people to see this, it starts at the top. It doesn't start with me having an open meeting, us having an open meeting, pardon me. It starts with giving us the instruction, and if this is what we're talking about trying to establish, I'm fine with that. But if we're talking about having 50 people come in and sit around a table and try to decide how to spend $10, it isn't going to work. So some instruction, you all get information from parents, from employees, from everywhere, requests to have things looked at. That's where that instruction to us needs to come, in my opinion.
I will tell you I agree. I agree. The board needs to, and me personally as a board member, I can't commit any other board member, but I can tell you that is my hope for this district moving forward, that we can truly be transparent in our conversations and in our study sessions, and we can have these as well. 3/4 of what is heard in the background is a rumor that has changed. It's like the little whisper in the ear, and by the time you get to the end of the row, total different message. That happens all the time. So I will tell you, I will commit to working with the other ladies on this board and with the superintendent, and I hope all board members will do the same. But I agree, we all need to be transparent, and I welcome you to call me on it if you catch me not being so, because I know you will. No one else might, but you will.
Yes,
First to the issue regarding community involvement, I would venture to say that as elected officials from the community, parents of students or not, you are their representative, and they're emailing you directly, or you're hearing from them, or they contact you somehow to let them know how you're feeling. So you are the voice of the community. You are giving us direction. You're representing them as you were elected to do. So that is their voice being brought to the interest table. Secondly, when it comes to transparency, DVA has always put out our survey two members and non. We survey all. We survey all. Just like we saw in the last general election for president, not all eligible voters are going to vote. So not all certified employees take our survey. But that's the only way we know to gathering data, not only looping out at board meetings, our representative meetings or our executive board or through our communiques newsletters. We are constantly gathering data from our schools and relying on our reps and that communication tree and system that we have. So we survey all. That's how the association works, is we are bottom up. We don't know what interests to bring to the table without knowing what the interests of our constituency are. So that's really, I just wanted to talk about representation and transparency.
Yeah, I'd like to say thank you for that, but I will add one little thing. As the board, we have to keep one level of separation, because we have to make decisions that we'll be called to make, and we cannot be biased in one direction or other. That's why we need community members on some of these committees, because they are those representatives, so that we can keep that separation, so we can keep, so we can remain unbiased. That's the reason for the community members separate from us.
Any other comments? Darcy, go ahead.
I would just say, and I mean, I do agree that it wasn't directed to be transparent in the past, meaning an open meeting. But I will say, talking to people who are politically involved and seeing how close the override, Prop 123, I'm not saying this is true, but there is a perception that money is wasted. And the only way you can change a perception is by doing things in the open. And when that is the perception, it hurts school funding. It hurts students. If you're spending their money responsibly, spend it responsibly in front of them and dispel the rumor. That's what I would do. If I'm accused of something I didn't do, I would bring it out into the open and prove it's not true. I think if we don't do that, that is why education's not funded. That's what they say. When you go to things with people that are politically active and the groups that come out against overrides and against bonds, that's what they say, if it's not true.
If I'm not mistaken, the charge of NST is to represent the groups in Deer Valley, to make sure that the employee groups are represented and the budgets are set fairly for those employee groups. Speaking on behalf of the BLT, we represent more than 99% of the building level administrators. We meet monthly. We discuss what's been talked about in NST. We discuss what our needs are. We discuss what our priorities are for the year, as does DVUSD, as does DVEA. This group represents what Deer Valley budgeting is about. Having an open meeting is quite frankly intimidating to me. I do that for CIT. I do that at my school level. It's with people I know very well. I am very open and very honest with my people, my Canyon Springs staff, my Canyon Springs community, my continuous improvement team. I get input from my parents constantly, and I can't sit on NST without bringing that input in. If we're not representing our entire communities, as well as who we represent on our campus levels and within our employee groups, we're not doing our jobs.
But I think you're misinterpreting what I'm saying. If they perceive you're wasting money, it doesn't matter if you are or not. If the public believes you don't spend their money responsible, they're not going to give you money. And things are coming really close to not passing. I mean, you can't look at the election results and view it any other way. Even the people who told me they weren't voting for these things said it's because they think money is wasted. I'm not saying it's true, but that they're going to vote on their perception, not what you do.
And that's the education piece that Maria just talked about. We can put it out there. We can.
How are you going to educate every community member in Deer Valley before they vote?
We can invite everyone in the world. The people that show up are the people who already know a lot of stuff.
I guess I just disagree, and as a taxpayer, I would want to see how my money's spent. And the other thing is the district I work for, they put out a PowerPoint that really explained what they anticipated happening this year in the budget process and how short they would be. And they had employee meetings, and the superintendent spoke, and the business explained exactly what was happening to every employee. So there's not going to be any surprises. They also talked about the composition of their budget committee and establishing a mechanism, because there might be people who aren't on the committee that have a good idea. I mean, that's the other thing. So when you invite, I'm not saying that they should all show up and talk at your meetings, but they should have a mechanism for submitting comments in case they have a great idea for saving money you haven't thought of yet. So I think a way to gather that data and review the comments, I would think that's, I actually am impressed with how the district I work for is going forward with this and setting up a process where everybody can send input, and it might not all be valuable, but it's worth reading. You never know when someone's going to have an idea.
Okay, before you go, I heard some murmuring. You guys want to speak it clearly, because I think there were some concerns.
So, remind me, Jim, when did Deer Valley start Budget 411, this website that is open to the public? What year did that begin? 07, 08? Okay. So the public has never stopped having that ability to provide input to the district since 07, 08? Would that be a fair statement?
When we first had to endure the state-imposed reductions and the declining enrollment and all those things that caused our budget to be reduced, we asked the community for input on suggestions of how we might be able to deal with that. We opened up on the Budget 411 page, we opened up a means for them to provide that information to us, and we received, I'm going from memory, but I think it was 300 suggestions that we categorized, and that developed a list, what we used to affectionately refer to as the cut list. And that list is what served us over the many years. We just kept coming back to the list. So as we needed to lop off more, we prioritized the list, and then we just came back to the list year after year and said, okay, well, we've done these other 5 things that we didn't want to do. Now we have to do the 6th thing that we didn't want to do on that list. That list was derived of community members and staff members alike could provide that input. We have since not collected that information, but we have the means of doing that and use that list for almost a decade in terms of the cuts. But specifically the tool is not active.
But the page is still there?
The page is there, and all the information is there. So how we spend the money, our comprehensive annual financial report, the Auditor General study, all that is on that page.
So then I guess I would also say is when you have the meetings, present some of the comments in some kind of a usable fashion that you're getting so that people can, well, I would say after you collect the comments, I'm assuming that was going to change. Wouldn't present that you're not collecting comments.
Can I ask one question? Because all these members have been on this for a while. Can any one of you raise your hand and tell me you've read the CAFR?
The what?
You don't get to.
Couldn't hear you.
That's the greater problem. Have any of you read the CAFR?
The comprehensive annual financial report.
Annual financial. Because what you're telling me is that you've put the CAFR out there and you want someone to read it and then comment, but you're having meetings. You don't comment based on a document like that. I mean, the only time I ever read a district's CAFR is either A, I'm producing it, or B, I'm applying to be their business manager. That's the only time I would ever read it. The general public is not going to read the CAFR and comment. They may sit in your meetings and keep their mouth shut, and then have a method to ask you a question. But they don't know what to ask if they don't even know what you're talking about.
Is the CAFR different than the annual financial report? Or
No, it's just certified. That's the only difference. It's the same thing. It's
well,
the book.
that was reviewed at the
gold.
last meeting. We went over.
I'm not talking about reviewing it, but that's what I'm saying. You're in a meeting and you're reviewing it, but you're putting it out on a website and saying, but the public could have read it and asked us about it. Unless I misunderstand.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So just to kind of recap, it sounds like from what I'm hearing from both sides of the table is that, number one, there's a concern that the public is not as well educated as they could be on the budget. And number two, there's a concern about opening NST for community members, and that may not be the appropriate place to invite community members into the negotiated solutions team meeting. But there needs to be some mechanism, whether it's reactivating the 411, because I do recall that when the first really steep cuts came down, that was very effective. So there needs to be some type of an outreach towards re-engaging the public, because I will echo, I heard the same comments that Darcy did during the campaign, talking to constituents or potential voters, and I heard someone say, you know, I would vote for more money for the schools, but I'm afraid it will never reach the students. And again, if that's that person's perception, then I'm sure you've heard the phrase perception is reality. That's their reality. So then what do we do as a board, as a community, as a district to change that perception so that the next time an override is needed, that we're not, you know, having the cliffhanger that we had the last time, where we're waiting for 5 days to find out, and we lost it on election night, and then we won it. We just barely squeaked by, because that also says that at least half of the voters, or the people who voted in that election, voted no. And that is very concerning to me. I can relate it to my current career path in with the air quality department. Anytime there is a change to an environmental regulation, there is a period of time that's required to be open for public comment, so that all stakeholders have the opportunity to comment on the proposed regulatory change. So it's not quite an exact analogy, but a similar type of process might be helpful, so that we're not having teachers, administrators, other employees feel uncomfortable with having community members in the NST meeting, but we're still bringing those stakeholders into the process in some fashion, so that we do build trust. Because if we don't, you know, when you have to call for another override or a bond, you're going to be fighting the same battle, if that makes sense.
So you made a comment, if unless I'm not remembering now, the money not reaching the student?
That was a quote from a voter.
Okay. Define money reaching the student.
Well, this is what a voter said to me. I'm using that as an example of a voter's perception.
Okay, but then I'm going to ask you, what is your perception or definition of money reaching the student?
Well, that's a pretty broad category, because money reaches the student through the cafeteria manager, through the teacher, through the bus driver, through all of those support personnel. Everything from the desk they sit at, to the textbook they learn from, to the technology. Anytime you spend money on those types of things, that money is reaching the student.
And I fully agree, but I think that there are a number of very vocal people that have a much slighter definition of that money reaching the student, what's benefiting the student. I don't have any stats or any surveys to back that up. I'm just saying that everybody is going to have a different opinion of what they consider to be proper funding to the student's benefit. How do you make that equal to everybody, which is what I'm hearing you're wanting to have everybody participate, or at least have the availability. And I think we do have the availability for everybody to come and be aware of what's going on. I guess I'm getting lost on what you're suggesting that we need to be doing.
Here's an idea. So we have the budget 411, why don't we put our meeting notes beyond the portal once they're approved and put them out for public to see, so they know what we're discussing, and then open up for comments and ideas from the public.
Yeah, I mean, we can modify the process however we want, and that was the intention of this study session, quite honestly, was to get this type of feedback. So it's not that there's a preconceived notion. I've listed this slide as a recommendation because this is the thought that we had, but we really wanted to get the input from everybody collectively as to how we move forward.
Can I say something? Ms. Frank, I think, Ms. Frank, right? Mrs. or Ms.? Ms. I think that you make some really good points, and I think so much of perception is based on trust. So I feel that, you know, our comments made on how do we, our two groups, partner closer together to build the trust that our public has in the process. So I know we are searching and wanting information in a timely way and wanting more direction. And I think that slowly, if people see us working closer together, that perception and that trust is going to get stronger. And I think there's a lot of ways that we can go out into our community events and share information that we haven't really even discussed or thought about, but ways that we have you know, community events, district events, school events, where we can get more of that information out there on a more ongoing basis, instead of just at the time we have to make the decision.
Okay. I have some questions from the presentation. I almost forgot who I could look at for that. In the very last year of what was IBN, I was fortunate to get to be the parent community member. And that was a very enlightening process, and I'm glad that I had that opportunity. As I recall, so Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, those meetings were advertised, and public community staff could come and attend and watch. They could not speak, but they could come in and sit and watch the proceedings as that group discussed the very same topics that NST discusses. Is that correct?
That is correct, but we kind of changed the structure of the meeting. So we're meeting more frequently now with the NST process, and the topic is more centrally for the lion's share of the year is more centered around the budget itself, whereas it was much more concentrated through the IBN process. They were all-day events, and we tried to squeeze too much information into a very limited amount of time, and it was not always about budget. It was, you know, we tried to do everything all in those meetings. So the structures of the meetings have changed, but yes, they were open and posted, and they were public. We had very few people attend, quite frankly.
That was my recollection, that only a couple attended, but I guess you just made a statement that I need clarification on. When I thought that IBN was still on the 4 topics that are listed somewhere. I only have so many fingers on salary, benefits, employee rights, and terms and conditions of employment. But what you just stated is that now NST has been focused more on the budget as overall. Is that what you meant?
No, I may have said that. It's not what I meant. Okay. The structure of the meetings has changed. And so we're those monthly meetings, and the reason that we do them all year is they're informational for the NST members to get them at the same place that administration was. So it was felt that we spent the first day or two of IBN just trying to get everybody on the same page that we were on with the budget, because we've been living with it every day. And so instead of trying to I've heard the phrase used, you know, feed them from a fire hose. We try and, you know, it's a garden hose. It's on full blast, but it's a garden hose.
I understand.
We try and give them that information throughout the year so that they can see what's happening with the budget, and then they have a better perspective as we get into those meetings between February and April, when we're trying to actually finalize the interest into a recommendation.
Okay, and then, so I guess I am a little perplexed as to what made the IBN process a better or a process that allowed for it to be open to the public, whereas it would be uncomfortable for NST to be open to public members.
Strolling down memory lane when it comes to IBN. I was a new teacher at the time and attending. Luckily, as a high school teacher, I was able to attend and be here present by 2:30, which a lot of the elementaries did not have that luxury. But if you can imagine everything that both Jenna and Jim explained, if you can imagine, IBN originally was 5 days, then it was reduced to 3. If you can imagine those 3 days, you had to agree on staffing for the coming year, agree on your benefits package for the coming year, agree on new language changes for the coming year. It became that salary was squeezed to the end because that was obviously the most contentious thing. And if you can imagine, I mean, 3 days to encompass everything that we now use 9 months to try to decide. I mean, it was a little, that was aptly, there was a really good metaphor about the fire hose because that's what it felt like.
Right. I think you misunderstand my question.
Oh.
I'm not trying to change it back to a 3 or 4 or 5 day process. What I'm trying to understand is what makes it, what made it okay to have open meetings and community members when it was under IBN versus NST. And I get that your education is happening over, or your information is coming over multiple meetings throughout the year. And so somebody who is dropping in may not have gotten some of the background information, but if they're interested in whatever that topic is on the agenda that day and they want to sit in, I was trying to understand from you all what makes it uncomfortable for that possibility of it being an open meeting now.
I think the big thing is that we're so crammed for time that we don't have time to explain. We had longer days, they were paid days. Everyone that sits on these committees is in their own time.
Oh, mm-hmm.
So I think that's the biggest thing. And also, unless I'm mistaken, tonight is a public meeting. Where is everybody? I told everybody if they had a complaint, today was their chance to come and voice it. I mean,
I absolutely.
Ask me, we're doing a hell of a job here. I mean, nobody
agree.
here.
I agree wholeheartedly. I guess I would just ask for the committee, because I do think that what my fellow 3 board members at the other end were talking about, there is unfortunately a distinct perception out there with the media, unfortunately, and I think a lot of politicians who choose to create the story, whether it's factual or not, for all, that school districts are misspending their funds, and unfortunately there might be a district or a minority of districts, but it doesn't mean it's happening here. So I do think it is incumbent upon us to try to be as transparent as possible, and I would never ask you all to re-explain everything. If the public were to come to those meetings, it would be to sit and watch. They don't get to ask questions, they don't get to offer opinions, they certainly can write emails afterwards, beforehand. I would just ask that we consider allowing the public to come to those meetings for their own interest and to ask questions. So I want to beat a dead horse, but I just want to I needed to understand that. So I have a couple more questions. I apologize. The sharing, your budget informational meetings, Jim, that occur from September to May, is that you sharing information about the budget, or is it the NST committee talking about how they want the budget funds spent?
It's actually sharing information. The initial meetings at the beginning of the year are just sharing information about the budget, so educating them on the budget as well as providing a projection for the upcoming year. When we get into those meetings, latter part of January, February, and March, that's when we're developing a salary recommendation that's centered around the interests that have been gathered by each group. So we're really talking about how the proceeds are being spent.
Okay, thank you. In the conforming language changes, it talks about public input meetings and the process for gathering, which DVE, I think it said that they do a survey. So everybody does a survey out. I would like to express that as a governing board member, I would love to see that data, especially when you're making the recommendation, how many people you surveyed, who answered, and what are those breakdowns. And thank you for putting together the employee representative matrix. I love that idea. In the NST operating procedures, under team membership, it says others may attend and participate as observers. Is that to say other staff members?
As you indicated, that's kind of a holdover from the IBN, and it's evolved to us not allowing observers. That's another conforming change that needs to take place, if that's going to be the will of the changes.
Okay, and I would ask that that not be changed, and this committee consider opening it up and not having them, or just as it says, as observers only, not participating. When you loop information back out, does that happen on a monthly basis, and does that happen via email or just meetings? And I don't know who all needs to answer that.
I'll share so at the end of each meeting we have a agreed upon communication. Gosh, it's become so such a staple on the agenda, I can't remember exactly what it says. But because there's some agreed upon information for reporting purposes, I think is something along those lines. Because there's some things that we're actually talking about in there that we haven't quite vetted completely. And so we don't want people getting misinformation. So we'll actually agree collectively as a group, here are the things. And now what we're doing is comprising that into a summary. And the summary is what we're posting on the portal, which was suggested to maybe even expand that beyond just the portal posting. But so the agendas are posted as well as the summary. And then there's a loop out that happens within each employee group. You heard DVBLT, when they meet, they actually have a process for providing that. And each of the other employee groups have a means of sharing information that's happening with NST.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, just a couple more. And I'd like to say that I would agree. I think you all were kind of shaking your heads when Steve was talking about needing direction earlier on from the governing board, and I agree wholeheartedly about that. I do think that this committee should stay focused on the 4 items that are in there. I realize that that is interrelated with other budget items, but they're, the budget committee, and I believe there was actually a committee before there was Budget 411 where folks could just email in and add their ideas. There was a committee comprised of parents and staff from all levels, because we were looking at cuts, and it might be time to go back to having a budget committee to look at having all of those groups represented there so that we can be more direct in our what we tell NST. I know that one of the things I would love to know is young folks who are coming out of college to be teachers, you know, they don't care so much about benefits, but gosh, they care about that bottom line that's in their checkbook. So I would love to know if there's a way to offer our teachers an option to have a bigger salary and less benefits, while not excluding the teachers who still need to keep their salary where it is, or their staff, sorry, that's for all staff members. I mean, I'm not sure how we could work that out, but can you have a more flexible plan that would allow folks to say, I'd rather have that money in my paycheck than in benefits? I don't know if it's possible, and if it's not, I'll take that as an answer. I mean, I want to hear that answer.
Well, being a longtime member on the benefits committee, I do know that we're one of the few districts that still offer a zero op.
somebody saying something? Okay, so I do think it's really important that we do get the Deer Valley University going, and perhaps we do that in the month of January or February. I also think it's important to have consistent study sessions that are dedicated only to developing and understanding the budget, and those two can start in January, even though well, that would coincide with the newly elected officials being sworn in and all of that state election stuff starting, all those budget things, even though I'm sure we've got some stuff we know about. I don't know right now. I think when we talk about inviting people to NST, that what we are doing is confusing the delineation between developing a budget and developing what our benefits and salaries and working conditions are. So to me, that would cloud it up. I don't know, I've got to think and process having a specific committee for a budget as opposed to having regularly scheduled budget meetings where people can know that we are developing budget. But to intermingle the NST with the budget just then does, to me, exactly opposite of what we've all been trying to talk about not doing, which is to say that NST would be developing a budget as opposed to using what was available in the budget, their 85 to 86% of that, what their interests are in using that. But I really do think it's important that we figure out how to get the Deer Valley University started and not do a mini camp on it, but actually do the university. And however we want to decide, but we have to have at least the financial aspect of that included. And that's all I have to say for now.
One last thing. We talked about transparency, and this can be really quick, is push versus pull. When I run a website for a living, and when I'm trying to recruit customers, I just don't rely on them to find me in Google or whatever. What I do is I send out emails. I push my special tool, and that's what thing, we have it, 411, that's a pull. You're expecting people to go and find it. But I think we need to be more proactive and start pushing this data out to the people and staff. And that way, it appears more transparent. And I'm not just talking about staff. I'm talking about the legislators and anybody that's prone to criticize us. Let's get ahead of it. So anyway, with that being said, let's take the two comments here from Linda, and then we'll go to Kim. Linda and Christy. Yeah, Chris. Why don't you guys do it at the podium, Linda and Christy? Just say your name and then your comments.
I am Linda Slavic. Thank you, Board, for letting me talk. I feel NST needs to be transparent, and it needs to be held where all employees and the public may attend to listen to discussions and watch the process. I remember our former IBN loopout meetings where all employees could attend and listen but not speak. As a former member of NST, I was harassed by employees. Many complained to me that veteran teachers were treated unfairly, and why would I agree to such a deal? Others complained to me that our district didn't honor NST's deal. Yet others were mad that NST forgot whole employee groups. Reflecting over my experience, I feel having open meetings would have prevented some miscommunication issues. For instance, audience members may have realized that their groups were not being included in NST talks. Also, teachers would have heard the deal that was made with the board, which stated that teachers would get paid $50 a credit hour regardless if they received credit hours prior to teaching in Deer Valley. I'm glad to hear that this issue has been resolved. Another communication problem we had last year was when NST did not mention the requirements at the study session. The community had a right to know where district's money is spent. Being open and transparent will help employees trust the process in the district again. I would like to thank the board and NST for taking the time to discuss this important issue.
I'm Christy Cooper, and I just want to say that, you know, I am one of the only people here as part of the public, but when I'm listening and I'm hearing that so many people do not want anyone to sit and listen, that makes me worried even more. Because I don't understand if there is 2 people or 4 people or 6 people not able to talk, just listening to what you're saying and having that communication, why there would be a problem with that. And if there is a problem with that, then that makes me concerned that there isn't transparency. And hearing that you will only let people know about the things that you want them to know, that worries me too. So when you sit there and say, well, we'll let them know after the meeting's over and we'll let them know what we want them to know, doesn't make me feel like you're transparent. If you record it or you have it on video where people can watch it, then I would believe it would be transparent. But when you're only writing what you want people to know, then that does not seem transparent to me. And when you sit there and you look around and you go, well, wait, nobody came anyway. How many people were told about this meeting? How many people, the only reason I know is because someone told me to come. So I didn't get an email about it. So if you want people to show up, I guess you need to inform them that you're even having it and what the meeting's about. And then you can say, well, nobody cares. But if people aren't told about it, you don't know if they care or not because you didn't tell them. That's all I have to say.
Any comments?
Well,
oh, sorry, Trish. Let's take.
Do you want to respond? Yeah.
Because I said I'm uncomfortable. It's because we have very crucial and somewhat uncomfortable conversations in NST. We don't agree. And it's not pretty at times. Yeah. That's executive session for you. Yeah. That's what's uncomfortable for me. I don't want to see people at my worst. That's why it's uncomfortable. And for the staff not knowing about this, I know personally that every time we get a board agenda for a board meeting or a special session, it's emailed to my entire staff, and they know. It's also in the DV voice.
Okay. I guess the one thing that I'm hearing, and it's kind of consistent, is everybody is either willing to be more transparent, and the board is wanting more transparency. I think that's kind of clear across from what I can tell. Now, wanting to be more transparent doesn't mean we don't want to respect you and what you're doing as well. So I think we need to come to together to see how we can accomplish both. And one of the things, Anne had mentioned wanting to, that we need to have more of these meetings and of course get the university up, but perhaps we add a couple of study sessions throughout, invite the community, and have you guys come and report as we go through the process. Because the problem is you're right, we need to work. We're always open, but not talking. We get up there and we have an agenda and we go item, item, item. Schedule more study sessions. Have you all come, have us have more conversations. Come and present to us what you're talking about. But we do need to have it open. If perhaps we look into a way, if there are going to be some IBN topics that are not budget, and that's part of the reason for wanting to split the two, whether you have IBN and you have or NST and budget, is so that budget can be consistently open. But there will be times when you have employee topics that are not appropriate to be open to the public, and so perhaps those can be reserved to a quote unquote executive type session, or a more private meeting for those that are maybe not, we don't want to talk about certain things in public, but you still eventually have to come out and say, these are the basics. These are what we were talking about, and these are, so there's a little more privacy in NST when you have them separated, and you keep that openness in budget. That's one of the main reasons for separating them.
Being a little more solutions oriented and working smarter, not harder. Perhaps when the legislature's in session, that an NST report be a standing item, agenda item. That way, the public could actually speak to that agenda item and provide their input. We meet right prior to every first board meeting of the month, and we would have those report outs, well, tentatively speaking, or maybe the second, I don't know. But just have that as a standing agenda item, then the public's free to pose questions at the board meeting when we're hearing what the budget may look like or what bills may come across the governor's desk. Just a suggestion.
Okay. Anyway, I think it's pretty obvious that we want to make it as transparent and open as possible without encumbering business. So I think that's the direction. I think it's pretty unanimous on the board. As far as the separating it to a budget committee like Mrs. Fisher, I think that's something that the new board will have to vote on and consider for the 17-18 year. I think there's a couple more than one or two board members that suggested that. So, but I think everybody had a chance to speak. Anybody else? If not, I'm going to call for a motion to adjourn so we can all go home. Do I have a second? Okay, I'm going to delay the vote 20 minutes. All those in favor say aye. Aye. We're adjourned.